The war began without warning. One moment the villages were alive with music, trade, and the sound of children running in the streets. The next moment the sky burned with fire from ships that blotted out the sun. No one knew who had fired first, but every soldier on both sides was told the same story. The enemy had crossed the line, and there would be no mercy. Elias, a young soldier who had never wanted to fight, found himself thrown into the chaos. He had been a builder once, a man who shaped wood and stone into homes. But in war, no one asked what a man wanted to do. They only handed him a blade and told him to survive. For weeks he fought along the borders, holding ground that shifted every sunrise and was lost by sunset. He learned to keep his head low, to trust little, and to question even less. It was during one of these endless skirmishes that he saw her. She was crouched in the ruins of an old stone hall, her cloak torn and her skin a strange shade of violet that caught the light even in the smoke. At first Elias thought she was another scavenger, a shadow looking for food or scraps of armor. But when he stepped closer, he noticed her hands were bound, her eyes wide and filled with both fear and pride. The other soldiers passed her by, some with disgust, others with cruel laughter. To them she was nothing more than a banished alien, a cursed girl left to rot by her own people. They called her unwanted, dangerous, not worth a second glance. Yet Elias felt something different stir in his chest. She was young, not much older than he was, and though she sat quietly, her posture held a dignity that made her stand apart from the ruin around her. He crouched beside her, ignoring the mocking voices of the others. "Are you hungry?" he asked softly, pulling a small piece of bread from his satchel. Her eyes widened, not at the food, but at the kindness in his voice. For a moment she did not move, as if she was waiting for a trick, some cruelty hidden beneath the offer. But when Elias held it out with steady hands, she reached forward, her fingers trembling, and took the bread as though it were a gift of gold. As she ate, Elias studied her. The violet hue of her skin was marked with faint glowing lines that seemed to pulse softly, like stars buried beneath the surface. Her hair was silver white, falling across her face in waves that caught the light even in the shadows. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen, yet she looked fragile in that moment, sitting on the cold stone floor eating slowly, carefully, as though afraid it would be taken away. "You should not help her," a voice growled behind him. Another soldier, broad and scarred, spat on the ground. "She's nothing. Her people threw her away. Better to leave her to die." Elias felt anger rise in him, but he kept his voice calm. "She's someone," he replied simply. "That's enough for me." The soldier sneered and walked off, muttering curses. But Elias stayed. He offered her water, and when she drank, he noticed tears glistening in the corners of her eyes, quickly brushed away before anyone could see. She whispered something in a language he did not understand, her voice soft like wind through leaves. Still, the meaning was clear. She was thanking him. That night, as the camp grew quiet and the fires burned low, Elias could not shake the image of the girl from his mind. Why had she been banished? Why did her people treat her as if she were poison? And why? When he looked into her violet eyes, did he feel as though there was more to her story than anyone around him realized? He did not know that her name carried weight, hidden like a secret blade. He did not know that the girl he had fed was not just banished, but hunted. And above all, he did not know that she was the true heir to the empire his people had feared for generations. The morning after, the camp stirred with the usual noise of soldiers preparing for another long march. Elias tightened the straps on his worn armor and checked his blade. Around him, men laughed, shouted, and cursed as they packed supplies, but his mind kept returning to the girl. He had not even asked her name. When he looked to the corner of the ruins where she had been, he saw her still there, sitting upright with her cloak wrapped tightly around her. She looked smaller in the light of day, her silver hair tangled, her violet skin faintly glowing in the sun. A guard stood nearby, making sure she did not wander, but he paid her little attention. To him, she was not worth the trouble. Elias walked over with a piece of dried meat and a small cup of water. "Here," he said, crouching down again. Her eyes lifted to meet his, soft and cautious. She reached out slowly as though every movement cost her trust. When she ate, Elias noticed her hands, delicate but with faint marks of chains around her wrists. "Do you have a name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone was listening. Her lips parted and she spoke a single word. "Serenia." The name fell like a whisper, but it carried weight Elias could not explain. It felt old, important and somehow familiar, though he had never heard it before. "Serenia," he repeated, offering a faint smile. "I'm Elias," she nodded, her eyes lowering again. But not before he saw the hint of relief that someone had spoken to her like she mattered. The march began, and the army moved through broken towns and burned fields. Serenia was tied with a rope, forced to walk behind the column, though Elias stayed close whenever he could. He offered her water when the sun grew harsh, and when she stumbled, he caught her before the guards could shove her to the ground. His kindness earned him sneers from the others, but he ignored them. That evening, as the soldiers set up camp, Elias found himself sitting near her again. He shared a piece of bread, and for the first time she spoke more than a single word. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "Why what?" Elias asked, tilting his head. "Why help me? No one else does." Her violet eyes were sharp now, watching him carefully, searching for lies. Elias thought for a moment. "Because I would want someone to do the same for me," he said simply. "Because you're not nothing, no matter what they say." For a long moment, Serenia stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, her lips curved into the faintest smile, one so small it might have been missed by anyone else. But even as she smiled, shadows stirred at the edges of the camp. Serenia's gaze flicked toward the tree line, and for the briefest moment fear crossed her face. Elias followed her eyes but saw nothing except the darkening forest. When he turned back, she was staring at the ground, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. That night, while the soldiers slept, Elias dreamed of fire and crowns. He dreamed of a throne made of stone, and a girl with violet skin sitting upon it, her silver hair shining like a river of light. She raised her hand, and armies bowed before her. Then the dream shattered with the sound of distant horns. Elias woke with his heart racing. The camp was in chaos, soldiers shouting, grabbing weapons, torches flaring against the night. Raiders had struck in the dark, their arrows hissing through the air. Elias leapt to his feet, his blade in hand. In the chaos, he saw Serenia huddled against the stones, a guard dragging her roughly away from the flames. Without thinking, Elias charged. He cut down the raider who had broken through the line, then shoved the guard aside and pulled Serenia to her feet. She stared at him, her eyes wide, and for the first time her voice rose in panic. "They found me!" she cried, though Elias could barely hear her over the roar of battle. He didn't understand what she meant. All he knew was that she was terrified, and that she was more than the world wanted him to believe. The night sky was lit by fire and arrows. Soldiers shouted orders, clashing with raiders who moved like shadows through the camp. Elias pulled Serenia behind him, his sword raised, his body braced against the flood of enemies. He had fought battles before, but something about this attack felt different, more focused, more deliberate. The raiders did not strike at random. They cut through soldiers, always angling closer to where Serenia stood. Elias noticed it. Their eyes were not on supplies, not on gold or food, but on her. She tried to shrink into her cloak, her silver hair catching the firelight, but she could not hide. Whoever these attackers were, they had come for her. One of them, taller than the rest, pointed toward her with a jagged spear. He shouted in a harsh tongue, and several raiders surged forward at once. Elias moved without thinking. He blocked a blow with his shield, his arm shaking with the force, and slashed back hard enough to drive the man down. Another leapt at Serenia, but Elias shoved her aside and cut him down before the blade could touch her. The camp was chaos. Soldiers fought in scattered groups, some falling, some holding their ground. Elias's unit had been broken apart, and he realized no orders would save them now. If he wanted Serenia safe, he would have to make the choice himself. "Come with me," Elias shouted, grabbing her hand. She hesitated, her violet eyes wide, then nodded. Together they slipped through the smoke, ducking between tents, dodging fallen beams and bodies. Twice Elias had to stop and fight, but each time he pushed forward, pulling her toward the edge of the forest. When they finally reached the trees, Serenia pulled free, her breathing ragged. "You don't understand," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "They will not stop." "Then we'll keep moving," Elias replied, wiping blood from his blade. "We'll lose them in the forest." She shook her head, clutching her cloak tightly around her. "No, they follow me, always. They know who I am." Elias frowned. "You're a banished girl, aren't you? Why would anyone care enough to hunt you?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was no guard in her expression, no wall to hide behind. "Because I am not just banished, I am heir. My blood is the empire they fear." The word struck Elias like a hammer. He blinked at her, confused. He had heard tales of the imperial family, stories of rulers who commanded vast armies and bent worlds to their will. But those stories belonged to people untouchable, distant, almost mythical. Not to the girl who had eaten bread from his hand. "You're saying," Elias began slowly. "You're the heir?" Her gaze was steady now, even as her voice trembled. "Yes, I was hidden away, betrayed by those closest to me. They spread lies, called me cursed, and cast me out. But there are still those who remember, those who would see me dead before I can claim what is mine." Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. The kindness he had offered her was no longer just kindness. It was a choice with weight, one that could shape the fate of entire kingdoms. But as he looked at her, tired, trembling, yet still holding herself with quiet strength, he knew his answer had not changed. "You're still Serenia," he said firmly. "The one I gave food to. The one who thanked me. That's all I need to know." Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. From the forest behind them came the sound of horns. The raiders were not far. Elias tightened his grip on his sword. "We move," he said. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me." Serenia stared at him for a moment longer, then nodded. Together they vanished deeper into the forest, the flames of the camp fading behind them. And though Elias did not yet know what it meant to walk beside the true heir of the empire, he knew one thing: he could not turn back now. The forest swallowed them whole, its tall trees stretching high, their branches twisting together to block out the fading moonlight. Shadows stretched long, and every sound seemed louder in the silence between. Elias kept his blade in hand, his other arm guiding Serenia as they pressed deeper into the woods. Behind them, faint echoes of horns and shouts drifted through the night, reminders that their pursuers were not far. Serenia moved quickly despite her exhaustion. Her cloak swept across the damp earth, her glowing markings faint under the hood she pulled tight around her face. Elias watched her as they hurried along. There was something in the way she carried herself now, no longer only a frightened girl but someone who had been taught to endure. He wondered what her life had been before exile, what weight she had carried even as a child. At last, when the sounds of pursuit grew distant, they stopped near a small stream. Elias knelt, filling a cup with water and offering it to Serenia. She accepted it, her hands trembling as she drank. For a moment she looked less like a hunted heir, and more like the girl he had first seen in the ruins. Tired, hungry, but grateful. "You saved me again," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just stood in the way." Her lips curved into a small smile, but it faded quickly as her eyes turned to the stream. "You still don't understand what you've done. Helping me makes you a target now. They won't stop, Elias. They'll come for you, too." "Let them," Elias answered without hesitation. His voice was steady, though deep inside he felt the weight of her words. He was only one man with a sword, and yet he spoke as though it made no difference. Silence lingered between them until Elias finally asked the question that had been clawing at him since she revealed her secret. "Who betrayed you? Why would your own people cast you out?" Serenia's violet eyes lifted to meet his, and for a long moment she did not speak. Then slowly, she pulled her cloak aside, revealing a pendant hanging from a thin chain around her neck. The jewel at its center glowed faintly, pulsing with the same light as her markings. "This was my mother's," she said, "the Empress. Before she died, she placed it on me, naming me as her successor. But not everyone accepted it. A council of nobles claimed I was cursed, that the empire would fall if I took the throne. My uncle led them. He wanted the crown for himself. So they spread lies, banished me, and sent hunters to make sure I never returned." Elias stared at the pendant. Even without understanding its power, he could feel the weight of it, the history carved into its glow. "So your uncle rules now?" "Yes," Serenia whispered. "And he will do anything to keep it that way. That is why they hunt me." Elias leaned back, his mind turning. A banished heir, betrayed by her own blood, hunted across battlefields. He had stumbled into something far greater than he could have imagined. Yet when he looked at her, he didn't see a crown or a throne. He saw a girl who had been abandoned, alone in a world that wanted her gone. "They may call you cursed," he said, his tone firm. "But I don't see a curse. I see someone worth saving." Serenia's breath caught, and for a moment her composure broke. She reached out, her hand brushing his arm as though needing to anchor herself in his presence. "No one has ever said that to me," she whispered. Before Elias could reply, a branch cracked in the distance. He rose instantly, sword drawn, eyes scanning the shadows. Serenia slipped back into her cloak, her face hardening. The moment of quiet was gone. Figures moved between the trees, dark shapes with glinting steel. Elias counted at least 5. Raiders again, their movements precise, their eyes fixed on Serenia. "They've found us," she said, her voice steady now despite the fear in her eyes. Elias tightened his grip on his sword. "Then we fight." The raiders closed in, their steps light on the forest floor, weapons gleaming faintly under the sliver of moonlight. Elias pulled Serenia behind him, raising his blade with steady hands. His heart pounded, but his stance did not falter. He had fought battles before, but never with stakes like this. This time he was not defending a camp or a line in the dirt. He was defending her. The first raider lunged, his curved sword slicing through the air. Elias caught it on his own blade, sparks flying in the darkness. He twisted hard, using his weight to shove the man aside, then struck quick and true. The raider dropped, but more were already rushing forward. Serenia's violet eyes glowed faintly in the shadows, her hands gripping the pendant at her neck. She whispered words in her own tongue, her voice soft but urgent, as though calling to something Elias could not see. When the next raider swung at him, Elias felt the air shift, his movements quicker, sharper, as though unseen strength had guided his arm. He struck and the raider fell. "What are you doing?" he asked between breaths, blocking another strike. Serenia's voice was strained but steady. "Helping you. The pendant carries the blessing of my mother. I can lend you part of it. For a time." Elias nodded, not understanding fully but trusting her. He fought with renewed force, his strikes cleaner, his steps surer. The raiders tried to surround him, but each time he moved as if one step ahead of their blades. Still, there were too many. One cut across his arm. Another slammed into his shield so hard his shoulder burned. Then, to his shock, Serenia stepped forward. She raised her hand, the glowing markings on her skin pulsing brighter, and the air itself seemed to ripple. A flash of light burst outward, blinding the nearest raiders. Elias seized the moment, cutting them down before they recovered. "You can fight?" he asked, astonished. Her expression was grim. "Not as I once could. They took much from me when they banished me. But I still have fragments. Enough to protect us." Her words carried sorrow but also strength. For the first time, Elias saw her not only as a girl needing protection, but as someone born to lead. Even weakened, even hunted, she stood with him in the dark. The last raider hesitated, his eyes darting between Elias and Serenia. He snarled something in his rough tongue, then turned and fled into the trees. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of Elias's heavy breathing. He lowered his sword, his arm shaking from exhaustion. Serenia's glow dimmed, her strength faltering. She swayed and Elias caught her before she fell. Her silver hair brushed his face as he steadied her. "You shouldn't have pushed yourself," he said gently. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I had not, you would be dead." Elias smiled faintly, though his chest ached with worry. "Then we saved each other." For a moment their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, but undeniable. Yet neither had time to linger. The forest was still dangerous and the raiders who fled would return with more. "We can't stay here," Elias said firmly. "If your uncle truly wants you dead, we need a place he can't reach you." Serenia nodded, her strength slowly returning. "There is one place, an old refuge hidden deep in the mountains. My mother built it long ago for times of war. Few know of it, but if we can reach it, we may have a chance." Elias tightened the strap on his shield, his mind already set. "Then that's where we go." The two of them moved deeper into the forest, guided by the faint glow of her markings. Around them, the night stretched on, filled with whispers of pursuit. Yet with every step, Elias felt the bond between them grow stronger. She was no longer only the banished girl he had fed. She was Serenia, the heir, the hunted, the one who now walked beside him, and he had sworn, silently and fiercely, that no matter the cost, he would see her safe. The forest gave way to rocky hills as dawn crept over the horizon. Elias and Serenia climbed steadily, their bodies weary but their pace relentless. The further they went, the thinner the trees became and the sharper the wind cut across the stones. Above them, the mountains loomed like jagged teeth, their peaks lost in clouds. Elias glanced at Serenia. She walked beside him, her cloak pulled tight against the chill, her silver hair whipping in the wind. The faint glow of her markings had dimmed after the battle, as though her strength was still recovering. Yet her steps were steady, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. She carried herself like someone who had walked through storms before. "You said your mother built a refuge here," Elias said, adjusting the strap of his pack. "What kind of place is it?" Her eyes flicked toward him, then back to the path. A sanctuary. Hidden chambers carved into the mountain itself. Only the Imperial line knew the way. It was meant to be a last defense if the Empire ever fell to war. Supplies, weapons, archives, and protections that even my uncle's hunters would fear. Elias nodded, though part of him doubted any place could be truly safe. Still, the way she spoke carried conviction. It gave him hope and he clung to it. As the day wore on, they rested by a stream, drinking cold water and sharing the last of Elias's bread. Serenia sat in silence for a long while, her fingers tracing the glowing pendant at her neck. Finally she spoke. "When you first gave me food, I thought you were a fool." Elias raised a brow, a small grin tugging at his lips. "A fool?" "Yes," she said softly, though there was a trace of warmth in her voice. "Kindness is dangerous. It draws attention. It makes others see weakness. I thought you would suffer for it, and perhaps you will." Elias shrugged, leaning back against a rock. "If it makes me a fool to be kind, then I'd rather be a fool." For the first time since he had met her, Serenia laughed. It was soft, almost uncertain, as though she hadn't done it in years. But the sound carried through the air, warming Elias more than the weak sun overhead. The moment ended quickly. A hawk's cry split the sky, too sharp, too close. Serenia's head snapped upward, her eyes narrowing. "That's no bird," she whispered. "They're tracking us." Elias followed her gaze, spotting the glint of metal far above, wings that were not feathered but forged. A scout drone. He cursed under his breath, grabbing his sword. "We have to move," Serenia said, her voice urgent now. "If one drone has found us, the hunters will not be far." They pushed on, climbing higher into the mountain paths. The air grew thinner, their breaths ragged, but neither slowed. Shadows stretched across the rocks as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. By nightfall, they reached a narrow pass. The path twisted between two cliffs, sheer drops on either side. Serenia stopped, her hand pressed against the rock wall. The pendant at her chest pulsed, casting faint light across the stone. Strange markings shimmered in response, symbols hidden until her touch revealed them. "This is it," she whispered. "The entrance." The rock trembled. A section of the cliff split apart, revealing a dark passage leading into the mountain. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of stone and ancient dust. Elias stared in awe, but before they could step inside, a horn echoed across the pass. Figures appeared on the ridge above, their armor catching the last rays of fading light. Imperial hunters, dozens of them, armed and waiting. Elias gritted his teeth, pulling Serenia back against the stone. "They found us." Serenia's voice was low, steady, but there was fire in her eyes. "Then we make our stand here, at the threshold of what they fear most." The hunters moved with precision, spreading across the ridge until the mountain pass was trapped under their gaze. Their armor gleamed with the crest of the Empire, cruelly familiar to Serenia. She stiffened, her breath caught in her throat. These were not raiders. These were her uncle's chosen soldiers, trained to erase her existence. Elias placed himself in front of her, sword raised. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice calm but steady with resolve. The lead hunter stepped forward, his helmet catching the glow of the fading sun. "Return the girl," he called, his voice echoing down the pass. "Lay down your weapon, human. She is not yours to protect." Elias tightened his grip on the hilt. "She's not yours to hunt," he answered. A harsh laugh rolled down from the ridge. "She is cursed blood, abandoned by her own kind. Protect her, and you will share her fate." Serenia's hands clenched around the pendant. Her markings glowed faintly, pulsing with her rising anger. "Lies," she whispered, almost too low for Elias to hear. "Always lies." The hunters began to descend the ridge, their movements precise, their blades catching the last of the light. Elias's heart pounded. They were outnumbered, and the narrow pass left little room to maneuver. Still, he planted his feet firmly, his shield raised. The first hunter leapt down, striking hard. Elias blocked, the clash of steel ringing out across the cliffs. Another followed, and soon Elias was locked in a storm of blades. He fought with everything he had, his arms burning, his shield cracking under the relentless strikes. Yet he refused to yield. Each time he faltered, he thought of Serenia behind him, and the promise he had made to see her safe. Serenia's voice rose behind him, sharp and commanding. She raised the pendant, and its glow burst brighter, illuminating the walls of the pass. The hunters faltered, some shielding their eyes. Then the markings along the cliff responded, glowing as if awakening from centuries of sleep. Ancient symbols flared to life, lines of power racing through the stone. Elias risked a glance. The mountain itself seemed to stir, the air vibrating with a hum that prickled his skin. Serenia stood tall, her violet eyes burning, her voice steady now as she spoke words in the imperial tongue. She was no longer only a girl on the run. She was heir, blood of the Empress, and the mountain knew it. The ground shook. Chunks of stone broke loose from the cliffs and hurled themselves at the hunters. Screams echoed as men were flung from the ridge, their bodies vanishing into the depths below. The survivors hesitated, their blades shaking as they looked down at Serenia, who now glowed with the authority of her lineage. Elias cut down the last soldier near him, then turned to see her fully. She stood framed by light, the pendant blazing at her chest, the mountain's markings pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. For a moment, Elias almost forgot to breathe. The lead hunter snarled, shouting, "She is no heir. She is a fraud." But his words shook, his certainty cracking as the stone itself answered her presence. Serenia lifted her hand. The symbols blazed brighter, and a wall of rock surged upward, sealing the path behind them. The hunters roared in frustration, cut off, pounding uselessly at the barrier. Silence fell, broken only by Serenia's ragged breathing as the glow began to fade. Elias caught her before she collapsed, his arms steady around her shoulders. "Serenia!" Her voice was faint but resolute. "The mountain still remembers my blood. That is why my uncle fears me. That is why they must hunt me until I am gone." Elias looked back at the sealed pass, then at her exhausted face. His heart burned with determination. "Then let him fear. We'll show him why." She gazed at him, her lips trembling as though words would fail. But in her eyes he saw something new, hope. Together, they stepped into the dark passage of the refuge, leaving the hunters raging behind. The passage swallowed them in silence as the stone wall sealed behind. Elias adjusted his grip on Serenia, helping her steady her steps. The glow of the pendant dimmed until only faint threads of light traced along the walls, guiding them deeper into the mountain. The air was cool and smelled of dust and old stone, as though no one had walked these halls for centuries. Elias whispered almost reverently, "This place, it feels alive." Serenia leaned against him but kept moving, her voice soft. "It is. My mother wove the bloodline into its walls. It only opens to one of true descent. Even in death she wanted the Empire to remember." They passed carvings etched into the stone, worn by time but still majestic. They showed emperors of ages past, battles fought and won, crowns lifted high. Elias slowed to study them, but Serenia's eyes lingered longer. Each face carried meaning for her, ancestors whose legacy had been twisted by her uncle's lies. At last, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. Elias stopped short, his breath caught. The hall stretched wider than any fortress he had seen, with pillars carved like giants holding the ceiling aloft. Along the wall stood shelves of scrolls and chests of weapons, their metal gleaming faintly in the dim light. In the center stood a dais with a stone throne, its arms shaped like wings, dust covering its surface. Serenia stepped forward slowly. Her silver hair glimmered in the faint glow, her violet skin reflecting the light of her markings as they flared brighter near the throne. She touched its arm gently, her voice breaking into a whisper. "This is hers, my mother's seat. She built it here to remind us that even if the palace fell, the Empire would not die." Elias watched her, struck by the way her posture shifted. She was no longer only the frightened girl he had met in the ruins. Here, in this forgotten hall, she seemed every bit the heir she claimed to be. "Serenia," he said softly, "if this is truly yours, then why not claim it? Why run?" She turned to him, her eyes heavy with pain. "Because power does not only rest in blood. My uncle controls the armies. The nobles bend to his will. If I step forward, they will call me cursed again, and their lies will drown the truth. To return, I must not only survive, I must make them believe." Elias nodded slowly. "Then we start here. We make this place more than a memory." She studied him, surprise flickering across her face. "Why, you owe me nothing." You could leave, return to your people, and no one would know. Elias's voice was firm, steady. Because I made a choice. The moment I gave you that bread, I decided you weren't alone anymore. I won't walk away now. For a long moment, Serenia only stared at him, her eyes glistening. Then she lowered herself onto the throne, her hands gripping its arms. As she sat, the markings along the walls flared to life. The entire chamber lit with streams of golden light racing across the stone. Elias stepped back in awe as the ancient hall came alive, glowing with power that had slept for generations. Serenia closed her eyes, her voice echoing through the chamber. The Empire still remembers me. Elias felt the weight of her words settle into him. This was not just survival anymore. This was the start of something far greater, a spark that could ignite the downfall of her uncle and reshape the Empire itself. Yet even as the chamber glowed with promise, shadows lingered in Elias's mind. The hunters had seen her awaken the mountain. Word would spread. Her uncle would not stop. And when he came, it would not be with a handful of soldiers. It would be with armies. Still, as he looked at Serenia seated on her mother's throne, her silver hair shining under the light, Elias knew one truth. He would stand beside her no matter how many armies came. The chamber's glow faded into a steady hum, the ancient hall settling as though it had breathed again after centuries of silence. Serenia sat still on the throne, her silver hair catching the golden light, her violet eyes shining with both strength and exhaustion. Elias stood at her side, watching her with quiet awe. But he knew this peace would not last. The hunters outside had seen enough to know she lived, enough to report what they had witnessed. By now her uncle's spies would carry the word across the Empire. Serenia was no longer a rumor whispered in the dark. She was real, alive, and once more seated upon a throne. Elias paced the chamber, scanning the shelves of scrolls and the racks of weapons. Some blades glowed faintly, humming with strange energy, while old banners of the Empire hung in tatters along the walls. Everything here spoke of power, but it also spoke of war. "They'll come," he said at last, his voice low but steady. "Not scouts, not raiders. Your uncle will send legions." Serenia's fingers tightened on the throne. "Yes," she admitted. "This place was never meant to hide me forever. It was meant to prepare me. My mother built it for a time when blood alone would not be enough." She rose slowly, stepping down from the dais. Her legs trembled, but her voice carried weight. "I must be more than her daughter. I must be the heir they cannot deny." Elias studied her carefully. She looked fragile still, but beneath the weariness he saw a fire growing stronger each day. "Then we'll make you ready," he said firmly. "But you won't do it alone." For the next days they explored the refuge. Elias tested the old weapons, finding blades sharper than any steel he had known, and shields that shimmered with strange force when struck. Serenia guided him through the archives, showing him scrolls filled with laws, histories, and songs of the Empire. She read aloud passages her mother had once recited to her, her voice steady even when sorrow touched her eyes. At night, they lit fires in the central hall. Elias trained with the glowing blades, his movements slow but deliberate. Serenia watched him, correcting his stance, surprising him with her knowledge of combat. She had once been taught to lead, and though her powers were fractured, her mind was sharp. "You fight with strength," she told him one evening. "But strength alone will not win. You must learn patience, timing. To strike not first, but when it matters." Elias chuckled between heavy breaths. "You sound like you've trained soldiers before." Her lips curved faintly. "I was meant to." The bond between them deepened with every passing day. Elias saw her less as the banished girl and more as the leader she was becoming. Serenia, in turn, looked at him not only as a protector but as a man who chose her without being bound by blood or crown. But beyond the mountains, the Empire stirred. Word of Serenia's reappearance spread like wildfire. Nobles whispered in secret councils, fearful of the bloodline they had tried to erase. Soldiers muttered about omens, remembering the stories of an heir who would return when the Empire was rotting from within. Her uncle, seated on the golden throne of the capital, received the news with fury. He ordered legions to march toward the mountains. He promised gold to any hunter who brought back her head, and he whispered to dark allies, seeking powers older than his crown, vowing that the Empire would never kneel to her return. Serenia knew this storm was coming. One evening, as Elias stood watch by the entrance of the hall, she approached him quietly. Her voice was soft but steady. "The day will come soon. Armies will stand at these mountains. When it happens, you don't have to stay. You've already given me more than anyone ever has." Elias turned, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. "I told you before I won't walk away, not now. Not ever." Her eyes glistened, her lips parting as though words might fail her. Then she reached out, her hand resting against his arm. The smallest gesture, but heavy with meaning. For the first time, Elias saw not just the heir, not just the hunted girl, but the woman who would change everything. And he swore to himself, silently but fiercely, that when the storm came, he would face it at her side. The mountains shook under the march of legions. From the high cliffs, Elias saw their torches stretching across the valleys like rivers of fire. Countless soldiers drawn by the command of a false emperor. Drums echoed against the stone, steady and unrelenting. The storm had come just as Serenia had warned. Inside the refuge, the ancient hall glowed once more, its markings alive with her presence. Serenia stood before the throne, dressed in armor she had uncovered from the old armories, silver plates inlaid with faint lines of light, a cloak flowing behind her like a banner. She no longer looked like the banished girl Elias had found in the ruins. She looked like what she was born to be, heir of the empire. Elias strapped his shield to his arm and tightened his grip on the glowing blade. He felt no fear, not because the odds were in their favor, they were not, but because he had already chosen. If this was to be their last stand, he would make it count. The first wave came at dawn. Hunters climbed the cliffs, scaling ropes and ladders. Soldiers advanced through the narrow pass where Elias had once stood alone. But this time they were not unprepared. Serenia raised her hand and the mountain itself roared to life. Walls of stone shifted, cutting off paths, while glowing symbols along the cliffs blazed and struck the enemy with bursts of searing light. Elias fought at her side, cutting down those who broke through the defenses. Each swing of his blade was timed with her command, each strike carrying the weight of his vow. Together they moved as though they were one. Soldiers fell back, shouting in fear as the mountain defied them. But the Empire's legions did not stop. Wave after wave came, their banners pressing forward, their horns drowning out the cries of the fallen. At their head rode a figure clad in black and gold, Serenia's uncle, the usurper. His presence was like a shadow against the light of the refuge, his voice booming across the battlefield. "Look upon her, soldiers, the cursed heir. See how she hides behind tricks of stone and flame. She is no empress, she is ruin." His words echoed, and for a moment doubt stirred among the enemy ranks. Serenia's jaw tightened, her violet eyes burning with fury. She stepped onto the dais before the throne, lifting her pendant high. Her voice rose clear and commanding, carried by the ancient hall. "I am Serenia, daughter of the true empress. You call me cursed because you fear me. You cast me out because you knew the empire would kneel to me if it remembered my blood. But I am no longer hidden, I am no longer silent, and I will not bow to a thief." Her words rippled across the battlefield. The pendant blazed, and the markings across the cliffs flared brighter than ever before. Soldiers faltered, their weapons lowering as whispers spread through their lines. Some dropped to their knees, bowing in fear or awe. Her uncle snarled and charged forward, his blade raised. The mountain shook under his power, dark energy crackling around him. Elias stepped between him and Serenia, their blades colliding with a roar. The force nearly drove Elias to his knees, but he held, gritting his teeth. "Step aside, human," the usurper growled. Elias met his gaze with fire. "Not while I breathe." The duel was brutal, each strike ringing like thunder. Elias's arms ached, his shield cracked, but he refused to fall. Then at the final moment, Serenia placed her hand upon the throne. Light erupted, pouring through the hall, through the mountain, through her. The usurper staggered, blinded by the radiance Elias struck, his blade guided by the mountain's power. And the usurper fell, his crown scattering across the stone. Silence swept the battlefield. Serenia stepped forward, her voice steady, her presence undeniable. The empire will no longer be ruled by fear. It will rise again, not through lies, but through truth. The soldiers who had once marched to kill her now bowed one by one, until the valley was filled with kneeling figures. Elias lowered his sword, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on Serenia. She turned to him, her expression softening. And for the first time since he had met her, she smiled fully, free, radiant, unburdened. "You were the only one kind to me when I was nothing," she said. "Now you will stand with me when I am everything." Elias bowed his head, but his voice was steady. "Always." And so, in the heart of the mountain where her mother's throne still glowed, Serenia reclaimed her destiny. Not as a cursed girl, not as a fugitive, but as the true heir with the man who had chosen her by her side. Together, they stepped into a new dawn where empire and hope would rise again.